I'm Michelle, welcome back to my channel. It is time to talk about the books that I've read in 2021. This was so hard because most other years I have talked about every single book that I have read at some point or another throughout the year, and I haven't done that this year. And there are some books that I really wanted to talk about, even if they didn't quite make it to like my favorites list. I just didn't want to overload this video too much. First things first, let's talk about accomplishments. The things that I feel like I really accomplished this year. One was reading from more genres. I do think that I did better, at least. Probably not where I want to be, but I did better. I divided my reading a little bit more between adult and young adult and so on. I think that there's definitely some other books in like the middle grade section that I would really like to read. I just never got to them. There's like The Bear and the Nightingale, there's The Girl Who Drank the Moon. Maybe we'll get to them next year. A series that I feel accomplished for reading was the Shadowhunter books by Cassandra Clare. I feel really accomplished for doing this. I am a little bit disappointed in myself that I didn't complete the entire universe. But we are still waiting on one more book that will be coming out in the Last Hour series. So I think that maybe when it comes out, then I can read the whole group together. I can binge read that, and then we can continue on with that series, because I do have the whole video series that I was doing along with it. I did also need a break because the last trilogy before The Last Hours, I was not enjoying. Pretty much everything about it just drove me up the wall. I don't even know how I made it through reading those books. They were so bad. And I want to go into The Last Hours without the negativity mojo from the previous books, because I want to take them in as like something new and fresh. And I have heard a lot of people have really liked the series, even when they haven't been super impressed with the others as well. So I think it's gonna be a really good experience, so I do look forward to it. Next was Throne of Glass series. I finally started the series. I have wanted to read the series for so long, and I've been hyping it up so much, and I wanted to like be in a position where I could like binge watch the series. I keep saying binge read the series. So I did start it, and I wanted to make some vlogs to go along with them, but that didn't work out. But honestly, I needed that. I think when I'm finished reading the series, I will do like some big wrap up thing and talk about all the books, maybe as a collective, and talk about all of the Sarah J. Maas books that I have read thus far, because other than finishing Throne of Glass and then the new book she has coming out with her new adult series, I think I've read all of her books. Where I'm at in the Throne of Glass series, I have finished the third book, which was Heir of Fire. The next book was Queen of Shadows. I decided I was going to take a break from the series because I didn't have the book and we're moving, but I can continue on with that series sooner rather than later. The next thing I want to talk about are all the classics that I read this year. I honestly wanted to read a lot more classics than I did this year, but what I accomplished is still really good. It's much better than I've done in previous years, so that's all that counts. And just in the books that I read this year, I read some super iconic classic novels. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I felt like I was struggling over that book quite a lot. I started to feel like I am not an intellectual enough to read this book, and I kept on with it. And even though I didn't understand everything, I can go back and read it again, and I think they'll get a lot more of it. And after reading Frankenstein, I read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Loved that book. Another classic I started reading was Tale of Two Cities. I was really feeling discouraged because I started reading Tale of Two Cities and Frankenstein approximately around the same time, and it was like one after the other that I was struggling with really bad. So it was like, it's not the book, it's me. But then I just switched it up and I picked up Great Expectations, which I'm still reading now, and love that book. It's not like it's hard to read, except you do need to take your time with it. And I just, oh my gosh, every single word on the page is just, I love it. I love it so much. That's really made me feel a lot better about delving into the classics, and some people's writing style is just really challenging and for different people. So overall, I feel really accomplished for reading the classic books that I read this year. The last thing I want to talk about for accomplishments is poetry. Before this year, I really have not liked poetry at all, could not get into it at all, until I picked up, not just that, it was a compilation of a lot of things. I actually made a whole video on it if you'd like to check it out. I will leave it in the cards or down below. It's all about how I got into liking poetry and like where I was with it before and who influenced me into poetry. But I think that the final thing that pushed me over the edge was reading Poetry for Dummies, and I love that book so much. And for like a textbook reference material type of book, I read that book back to back. I read that book on ebook. As soon as I was finished reading it the first time, I read it again and I transferred like my notes to Notion. That's how like influential that book was, and ever since then I have been like obsessed with poetry and like trying to find more poems that I really like. So life-changing. This year will always be iconic for that life-changing. All right, so let's get into my favorite books. At the end of every month, I was doing this thing where I would pick like my most favorite book that I read that month and my least favorite book that I read that month. Now, I think that any of the books in the Throne of Glass series have definitely made the cut for favorite books, but I'm not gonna add them to this list. Just the first one on this list is Fable by Adrienne Young. This is one of the first books that I finished at the beginning of the year. It was so good. I almost did not like this book either. First time I read it was like an audiobook, and I guess 100% didn't get into it. I was expecting something else, and something about it, maybe it was the narrator, I don't know. Then I decided to give it another shot, and I checked it out at the library and read the physical book, and I fell in love with it. I really, really loved it. I love the writing style. I love the descriptions. I love the characters, and I love the setting. And I was expecting that it was gonna be like a fairy novel, I think, but it's not. It actually, not exactly a pirate novel, but if you like pirates, you'd like this book. It has like light magic in it, just a hint, kind of like a magical realism sort of touch to it. So this book follows a girl named Fable who had been like abandoned on this island by her dad in order to like earn money, and she dives down in the ocean for this mineral, and she's really trying to earn passage to find her dad so she can seek revenge. It's just a really fun adventure. It's quite a small-ish book, I think give or take 300 pages. She like hops aboard this ship. She makes new friends. It's like a found family type of friendship, I believe. Yeah, so it's just a really fun, like quick-paced adventure novel that takes place over the sea and on a ship. What else happens in this? Yeah, so there's a little touch of magic. I don't want to spoil it for you, but it's pretty good. And then it also deals with kind of like a con and a mystery is like involved. What stood out to me too, to like really up the ante on this book, was the descriptions. I found them really wonderful. I found the characters' personalities really good. There was like a little touch of like a romantic thing. I was really confused about it at first because I thought that the male character was kind of like a much older character. Maybe that's because of the way he talked, and I thought maybe I was also thinking that she was a lot younger. So that's probably the only thing I had a problem with in this book, is it wasn't very clear what age group these people were subscribed to. The next book that made it to the favorites list, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This book is so interesting, why like some people really hate it and other people really love it. I did listen to it on audiobook. I think that it maybe would have been such a different experience if I actually got to read the physical book, but needless to say, it was so good. It was so interesting, and I felt that V.E. Schwab just did such a good job really characterizing somebody in such a realistic way in a magical setting in a realistic way of, I guess I should tell you what the book is about first. So this book is about Addie LaRue. She's born in like the 1600s or something like that. She is being forced into a marriage that she doesn't want to do. So she finds a way out of it, but it involves like a curse or a soul in her soul or something like that. The only catch is she wants to live a really long life and like go see things and do things. The only catch is nobody will be able to remember her. This book does such a really good job of exploring different ways that we make a footprint, how we're remembered, how the things that we touch are, you know, make a difference. So it's just really, really interesting. And I also feel like she does such a good job characterizing what it would be like to live this really long life where no one can. It's like a whole different type of loneliness. And on one hand, she's just kind of like, well, I did ask for it. And it's not like she's really like, I don't know how to describe it, because it's not like told to you, but you feel it when you read this book, like through the character. And it's just, I thought it was so well done. The next book is From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is the first in a vampire series. Going into this book, I had no idea that it was a vampire book. My reading experience of this, like, I was so into this book. I was just like at the edge of my seat. I could not put it down. Like, I remember at one point I was like, oh, I need to make dinner, and I started reading. I couldn't put it down, and I was like, oh my god, I have to put it down. And then, like, just as I went to put it down, a big thing happened, and I was like, oh my god. Like, that was my whole experience reading this book. I read it all on ebook. I know it's quite a hefty book, so that's quite an adventure on my phone, and I was so into this book. So it's about, what is it about? I keep doing that. I keep just jumping into like my experience before even explaining what this book is about. I'm a pretty big fan of Jennifer L. Armentrout. Wow, that is a mouthful. Jennifer L. Armentrout's work. So this follows a girl who is like this chosen one. She has to remain veiled. She is supposed to go through ascension. She lives with the Duchess, and she will be, her whole life is this ascension. She's completely like, she understands her duty and she's ready to serve it. She's excited to do this ascension, even though she doesn't really know what's supposed to happen to her. There's a lot of animosity in the world. She cannot go out. There are like radicals that like want to kill her. She has a bodyguard, and her bodyguard is like really good friends with her, and they have like a really good relationship, and he's been like teaching her to protect herself. And she starts sneaking out to get a little slice of life before this whole big ascension thing, and she knows her life will never be the same. That's kind of where we start out the book, where she is off on one of her midnight adventures and she meets this guy. Then this guy is at the castle or palace where she lives with the Duke and Duchess, and everything changes. It was just so much going on, and it was so exciting, and it just took me for a ride. I loved this book. I loved it so much that I immediately picked up the second book, and I was highly disappointed. I don't even know how far I made it, because again, it was like on ebook, and I just could not do it. Everything changed. Everything just like went, oh, I can't explain it, but I can't spoil it, because this is a very beloved series, and I couldn't even push through to find out like if things change. I might have to do it. I'm gonna have to do it, because I know that the third book has come out now. The next book that made the favorites list is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This is a big, iconic, dark academics book, and I think it really set the whole dark academia thing, aesthetic, lifestyle in motion. And I didn't know that this book was so far backlisted. I don't even know when it was published at this point, but I thought it was much more recent, just because it has gotten this huge following in the last like couple years that is incredible. But yeah, it was like 1995 or something like that when this book was published, and I was really shocked. But anyways, I really enjoyed this book. It's definitely very slow paced. It's not the usual sort of like fantasy adventure that I usually, you know, read. I liked it because the people were very interesting, and it's so weird that I really like this book because it had a lot to do with these college age group of kids, but they like all they would do was like go to class, have these like deep conversations, and do drugs, and I loved it. And it's just really weird because usually I kind of get that kind of thing. I just don't find that kind of thing interesting. But in here, I actually really liked it. I think something else that connected me to this story was that I feel like I know people like this. The mindset of how they think, so fascinating. Like Donna Tartt did such a good job of just like ingraining that type of just like how they see themselves in the world versus how like, I don't know, other people see themselves in the world. Getting that characterization like spot on was really good. The next book is Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. Oh my goodness. I had to listen to this one on audiobook again. I really liked it. I liked it so much that I really want to probably get a physical copy of it so that I could annotate it. This is the second Murakami book that I have read. The first one was After Dark. At this point, I have now read 3 Murakami books. I would like to work my way through all of his books. The last one that I recently just read was What I Talk About When I Talk About Running. Literally did that like the last week before the end of the year. And that wasn't my favorite. It's definitely much more of like a memoir about like his writing process. It was okay, but Norwegian Wood so far is at the top of my list. So how do I explain this book? This is about a guy. It's been a long time as well, because this was like the first book I read this like last January. So it's been a year, so bear with me a little bit. So this is about this guy who's friends with this guy and this girl who's like a couple. They've been really good friends for a really long time, and then I guess the friend that's a guy ends up committing suicide. Then our main character, who we're following the story with, he is in love with the girl, but she isn't over the other guy yet, which is understandable. But he's, and he's not like pushing her for like a love interest or anything like that. He's just he's really good friends with her. But then he also meets, gosh, I wish I could remember her name. He meets this other girl who is so the opposite of the other girl. I wish I could remember their names. Oh my gosh, I feel horrible. Like I'm doing this book no justice explaining what it's about. But they are like complete and utter opposites. One girl is very reserved. He can never really like fully get an understanding of how she feels about things. He's always trying to like decode her. And then the other girl, on the other hand, is just, she tells you everything and anything. She has absolutely no filter, but she has a really good reason as to why she's like that. And the conversations that they get into, they're kind of few and far between. They're not like everything they talk about is like revolutionary. But like you're just going along. You just cannot wait to find out what she's gonna say next. And then every once in a while she says something that is just like that makes so much sense. Like I'm gonna take that into my own life and learn from it kind of thing, like she makes you think in a little bit different way about a lot of things. And I just love her character so much. So I just had a lot of fun with this book. Quirky and it's fun. So that is Norwegian Wood. The next one is The Picture of Dorian Gray. This is another classic that I was really excited to read, another iconic book that I was excited to read. Like I know I don't need to explain this one. Like everyone knows what The Picture of Dorian Gray is about. I would hope so. But there was a lot of videos on like how to get started with classics, like what books you should start with, ones that are like easy to get into and breaking into reading in. And so this has been on the top of every single person's list. And yes, it is very quotable. It is very good, easy to get into. Has the conversations that Dorian and Henry get into at the start at the book as they're building up. And the first seed of corruption is planted. So good. And I swear this book has changed the way I think and how I put how I view myself in the world, ultimately how I view youth and beauty. Like I'm telling you, it seems kind of weird. I kind of feel like I should keep this to myself, but why not? I'm gonna share, because I am 36, and let me say, the last couple of years I have been feeling like I'm starting to show signs of getting older. Like my skin isn't as, I don't have any wrinkles or anything like that. I'm getting a little bit of gray hair, not a big deal. I've been getting gray hair since I was 23, so I'm like over that shit. Mostly it's like with my skin things, just other little things that have just been bugging me, and I'm like, it's the signs of my age. And it sucks, and it was really depressing. But then I read this book and I was like, who cares? Like, there is so much more to life than, and it's so nice to have that, it's so nice to have that feeling, because like, that's kind of one of those things you cannot escape. I think I read this book at such a good time. Like, I needed this book. Okay, so now we're gonna move into the next phase of notable books. While these books, some of them, it was hard to not go ahead and move them to the favorites list. You'll see, I'll explain. The first one on this list is The Lost Apothecary. This book was so good. It was a surprise. I thought it was going to be completely something else. I thought it was going to be like a witchy, like supernatural kind of book. And it wasn't. It was like a historical fiction. I would definitely classify this as like a dark academics book. It was so fun. It was kind of a small book to read. I did listen to it on audiobook, but this is about a woman who, she's like separated from her husband. Something happens between her and her husband, and they were supposed to go away for like an anniversary, and I believe it's like an infidelity thing. So they were supposed to go away. They had this whole trip planned for their anniversary, and because of the stuff that happened, she's like, I'm going alone. I need to get out of here, and I need to figure out my life. She's a historian. That's like what she went to school for, and she never really put it into practice. Like, she kind of put her life on hold for her relationship. Not like for her relationship, but you know, things just happen. Life happens, and sometimes we don't always follow the path for various reasons. So while she's on this vacation, she comes across this long dead mystery, and she started asking questions around this apothecary. She finds herself in this 200-year-old mystery that had never been solved. So she starts digging through these archives and putting together this story. So that's really fun. That's the whole like academic side of this and the mystery side of this. On the other side, so we have her timeline in the present, and then we have the timeline of this little girl in the past, what the story that she's putting together. She's taking us through her life. And there's no magic in this at all, but it is a magical read. I was shocked. Holy cow. That was a really interesting ending. And another thing that I really have to value about this book, you know, when you read like a mystery or a thriller, like we want to know because our historian is kind of just piecing through various documents and stories and publications that were like published in the newspaper from that time. Like, that's how she's piecing together this story. But there's elements to the story, like she can guess, but she will absolutely never ever be able to know. We find out what really happened on the other side. So you have this unsolved mystery, but a very satisfying ending. And also just the reality of what it's like to look into history and our limitations. And I think that was the most impactful thing of this book. I really, really loved it. And it is, the next one is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. I hated this book. You guys, this is so weird. I hated this book. I didn't hate the book. I just was like, wow, this is so bland and boring. And like, everyone keeps talking about this book. What are they saying that I'm not saying? There was a part in here that was so frustrating. So this is technically a dystopian novel about these kids that like live in this facility, and they are special. And we grow to understand that this specialness kind of means that they have some sort of special abilities or something that sets them apart, but we never understand. I don't ever figure out what it is that makes them special. The world and the setting is so subtle that I can't even really, like, I know that it's a dystopian, and I think a lot of that comes from people talking about it and saying that it's a dystopian, because actually reading through the book, it's not very clear. There is that. And then the way the story is told is it's these people in the present, these kids that grew up together in the present, and they are like going and talking about things that had happened in the past, and we're kind of piecing it together as the story goes along. They all like grew up in this facility together. They were a really close group of friends, and then something happened between like the girls, and they grew apart. So we're kind of going back and trying to figure out what had happened. I was so frustrated with this. I was so bored with this. But then I put the book down, went on with my life, still wondering why everyone loves this book. And then it started to happen. I kept thinking about this book. It would just pop up everywhere. I kept seeing the tiniest little thing in the book. I kept seeing it everywhere. And that thing is the girls, what had happened between the girls. So what had happened had some little tiff. It's a very tiny, minuscule little thing that happened. But like there's all these opportunities that came up to fix the issue, but then like they wouldn't say what they really wanted to say. And so with each passing time, they just kept growing farther and farther apart. Like every opportunity that was missed, the relationship grew more farther apart. I mean, how many times have you seen that? How many times has that actually happened to you? Now that I read this book, I think I see, like I can identify those times when something doesn't get said that needs to be said, or whatever. I think that this book, I'm gonna have to reread this book now. The next book that well, actually this is kind of a grouping of two. An author made the list, and that is Sarah Addison Allen. I recently read 2 of her books. I had picked up this little paperback called Garden Spells, and this was like right in the spring, and it was like cottagecore. That's the thing. There was all this like cottagecore stuff going around. It looked so like dreamy and cozy and stuff like that, and I found this book and I was like, oh, this kind of like cottagecore vibes, you know? So I read that book, and then I picked up another book, and I didn't even realize that it was also written by the same author. And both of these books are actually like magical realism, and they kind of follow these women who are not witches, but like they kind of are. Like they make things happen in the world, and it's a very like subtle type of magic. It follows like their relationships and their friendships, and one of them's like sisters, and then another one's like a mother and daughter or something. I can't remember. Both of these books though by her were really, really good. I have another one on my shelf by her, and she's definitely an author I'm gonna have to read more from, because I really loved both of these books. Yeah, Garden Spells and The Girl Who Chased the Moon. I think of those 2 books, Garden Spells reminded me of Practical Magic in a way. Okay, I have like 3 more. The next one is called The Peculiars, and this is like a steampunk fantasy novel. Complete surprise, the kind of magical creatures in this book are goblins, go figure. And they're just, the whole book was just this really fun adventure as well, in like a steampunk world. Our main character is like part goblin, so she's always like hiding her hands and feet because they're really elongated, as you can tell from the cover. And she's going off to track down her dad into the wilds, into the wilderness, into a land called Scree, and she believes that her dad has fled there. On her way, she runs into some trouble. She meets this guy, she gets robbed, then she ends up meeting a police officer who she gets the creep vibes from, but like she needs his help. I thought that this plot line was very interesting. On one hand, she's quite naive, but on the other hand, like she starts to kind of catch on to that, like he might be like flirting with her and wanting to take her out to dinner, but like he has ulterior motives. And I really like this because I haven't really seen that before. Good job at this like library, working with this other kid. And it's like a magical, it's kind of like a magical library. It's a very interesting, cool library with all these like inventions. This also ends up being where they start their adventure off into Scree, and it was really fun. There was a lot going on. There was a couple moments where they kind of like rush through a point just to like jump into another point. It kind of creates for like less of a seamless transition between one kind of storyline to another. But I don't even care, like the book was so good. Also, the author apparently is an awarded poet. I have not looked into it just yet. I will definitely have to remember to do that. I'm gonna get turned into Rudolph over here. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Mother. You can take off Christmas next. I'll fly it. Yes. I'll lead the sleigh. Ooh! You know how many times this happens. Like I'm totally fine, and then I turn on the camera and my nose starts itching. All right, so the second to last book is The Iliac Crest. I'm so impressed with this book. It is so beautifully written. It's so uniquely written because I think like I wish I had an example, but literally it's like just the sentence structure alone. It's just different. I don't know. Just the way the author like uses words. I don't know. I don't even know how to explain it, and I want to reread this book. I did read this on ebook, and I read it over the period of like a really long time. This wasn't like a focused read. I kept reading it thinking I don't want to read it on ebook. I want to wait till I can get a physical copy, but then I kept coming back to it, and like my reading experience was kind of disjointed all around reading it. So it definitely is deserving of another reread, but I don't even think I can do this book any justice trying to explain the plot to you, because I've listened to the plot, I've heard what it's about in theory, but as I was reading it, that's not what I got from the book. I kept thinking it was this whole other thing, and I might not have been completely off base. I thought it was like this whole study on like a person's identity, as like specifically gender identity, attempt to explain that beyond that. I just know this was a very significant book in my reading life this year. This book was originally written in Spanish, and so the whole gender identity thing is actually really fascinating. And I think because in Spanish language they have, you know, male and female designation for words. And so this kind of was that, but like kind of wrapped into like a plot in a story. This sounds so crazy. It really truly does. But like, wow, I don't know. This book was just so good. And this book actually made me want to start studying Spanish again, because one day, by hell or high water, I will read this book in Spanish one day. I want to read it in its intended language to see that play of masculinity and femininity. Finally, the last book that I'd really like to mention is Magnolia League. But I think another big reason why this one also made the cut is just because it's also so fresh in my memory. But this book was really surprising, and it was a lot better than I had expected. And then it's also like young adult, and I have not had a lot of luck with young adult books not disappointing me, because they're either written really juvenile or they are trying to push these teen characters into adult roles, and it's just so bad, just so tragic, or the stories are just basic. But anyways, honestly, this book overall was very well constructed. I thought it had a lot going on, and it was this really kind of fun adventure, and it had very interesting topics and things that were actually pretty well researched, like voodoo. The characters were all like fun to read and not what you'd expect. And then the relationships I found were very interesting between both the guys that our main character talks to, between her and her grandmother, between her and her old friends and her new friends, and just everyone. Relationships and the dynamics were definitely all new and fresh. Then we have the cultural change from Savannah, Georgia, Southern upper class socialites and debutantes, compared to California weed farming hippies. So we have our main character coming from California, farm, doesn't go to traditional school, just living free, has this very set idea of like what her life is like, everything is perfect. And then tragedy happens. Her mother's in a car accident, so she has to go live with her grandmother. But she's thinking, well, I don't have to stay. I'm gonna be an adult soon. She's gonna go back and be home and be with her boyfriend. And so something happens and she leaves, goes home. While she was gone, she realized things had changed. So she feels this immense betrayal, and she realizes that she doesn't really fit in either place. And this is a moment where I feel like makes this really like takes the cake for this book. Something happens, and so she ends up back in Savannah, Georgia, finds all this crazy shady shit happening there. So she sets out to like solve this mystery. And I started thinking, okay, well, I can see where this is going, and it did not go there. This was a really good book, and I do think that I am going to go seek out the next in the series. That's it. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know what your favorite book of last year was. Bye.